A brilliant surgeon with a warm smile spends her days helping elderly patients for free. To the people around her, she looks like a kind-hearted doctor. But hidden behind that gentle image is someone far more terrifying. A woman capable of taking lives without hesitation. How dangerous can a person become when genius and darkness exist in the same mind? Meet Hannah, a medical student obsessed with neuroscience. Since childhood, she had dreamed of understanding the human brain. With no family support and barely enough money to survive, she still refused to abandon her ambition. Even if it meant drowning in debt, Hannah was determined to become a surgeon under the country's most respected brain specialist, Professor June Park. Through relentless effort, Hannah finally earned admission into one of the nation's top medical universities. Her grades quickly gained attention, and before long, she was introduced to the famous professor she admired for years. The moment they met, Hannah confidently explained advanced medical theories, showing knowledge far beyond her age. She openly admitted that she wanted to learn everything he knew because medicine was the only future she had left. Seeing her determination, Professor Park took interest in her. From that point on, he personally guided her. Whenever there was an important operation, Hannah was called into the operating room to observe closely. The professor treated her like his most gifted student, investing nearly all his time into shaping her talent. And Hannah never disappointed him. In less than a year, she had developed surgical skills far ahead of her classmates. Some doctors even believed she could one day surpass her mentor. Her future looked bright, until everything suddenly collapsed. The hospital announced a prestigious overseas scholarship for advanced medical training. Everyone believed Hannah would be selected. She had already started preparing, convinced her years of sacrifice were finally paying off. But when the results came out, someone else got the opportunity. Shocked and furious, Hannah stormed into Professor Park's office demanding answers. The selected candidate's parent happened to be there, and Hannah immediately assumed money and influence had stolen her chance. Emotions exploded, accusations flew, and the confrontation quickly turned ugly. The professor, furious at her behavior, slapped her in front of everyone and suspended her from surgical practice. Unfortunately, things only got worse. Later that day, while most senior surgeons were away, a victim from a major car accident arrived needing emergency brain surgery. Time was running out, and there was nobody experienced enough to help. Hannah made a risky decision. Ignoring the suspension, she picked up a scalpel and began operating to save the patient's life. But at the worst possible moment, Professor Park returned. The sight of Hannah standing over the operating table enraged him. He immediately ordered her to stop and leave the room. Calmly, Hannah explained the emergency and even detailed her surgical plan step by step. She insisted abandoning the patient could cost a life. The professor refused to listen. Staff members dragged her away while the operation continued without her. For Hannah, something shattered that day. Blinded by anger and humiliation, she snapped. Grabbing an 4-tube, she rushed toward the professor and nearly strangled him before hospital staff pulled her away. In front of everyone, he struck her hard across the face. But the punishment didn't end there. Professor Park officially destroyed her medical career. Her license was revoked, and every door to the operating room was permanently closed. For someone who lived only for surgery, it felt worse than death. Broken and desperate, Hannah stood outside in the pouring rain begging for forgiveness. But no matter how much she pleaded, the professor never changed his decision. The promising student who once stood at the top lost everything overnight. But Hannah refused to disappear. Unable to work legally, she entered the dangerous underground world of illegal surgery. Gang members, fugitives, and criminals secretly came to her for operations nobody else would dare perform. Even without a license, one thing remained true. She never failed. One night, after saving a dangerous gang leader, an old hospital nurse secretly tampered with a patient's 4-bag. The woman had once worked alongside Hannah and knew all about her ruined past. She also knew Hannah was secretly performing illegal surgeries. Using that secret as leverage, the nurse threatened to expose her unless she paid a large amount of money. To make matters worse, the nurse cruelly enjoyed watching Hannah struggle. But she had made one terrible mistake. She underestimated the person she was blackmailing. Hannah calmly agreed to the demand and arranged a late-night meeting at an abandoned storage building. The nurse arrived smiling greedily after seeing stacks of cash waiting for her. But while counting the money, she suddenly felt something tighten around her neck. And 4-tube. Hannah stood behind her with a terrifyingly calm expression. There was no fear in her eyes, only satisfaction. Moments later, the blackmailer stopped moving. As if nothing had happened, Hannah quietly dropped the money into a donation box nearby. In her twisted mind, removing bad people from society counted as doing good. Helping her hide the body was Min, her loyal assistant, a man whose life she once saved. Too poor to repay her hospital fees, he stayed by her side and helped cover her tracks, even though he constantly begged her to stop killing. By day, Hannah operated a tiny legal clinic and treated elderly patients for free. Neighbors adored her kindness, believing she was one of the sweetest doctors around. Nobody knew what she became after dark. But eventually, someone dangerous entered her life. A recently released criminal from a nearby restaurant began obsessing over her. He constantly harassed women, abused his younger sister, and acted like nobody could stop him. First, Hannah ignored him. But when he started showing up outside her home late at night, staring through her windows and making her feel unsafe, something changed inside her. For the first time in a while, Hannah started planning another death. The next day, Hannah quietly visited the small restaurant owned by the thug's younger sister. She acted calm, but her eyes never stopped studying him. Every movement, every habit, every weakness. She observed everything carefully. The man had no idea he was already being judged. To Hannah, he was no longer a person. He was a problem waiting to be removed. Before leaving, she intentionally forgot her umbrella near the table. As expected, the thug rushed after her, eager for attention. Hannah thanked him with an unusual smile and casually invited him out sometime. For him, it felt like a dream come true. For Hannah, it was bait. The following day, while the thug rode his bicycle home, a red car slowly pulled beside him. The moment he looked inside, he froze in excitement. It was Hannah. Without hesitation, he climbed into the passenger seat, completely lowering his guard. Inside the car, Hannah handed him a cold bottle of water. He drank it immediately. On the way, she stopped to buy a large plastic sheet, casually asking him to help carry it into her house. Hoping to impress her, the thug eagerly agreed. Inside, he tried hard to act charming. But after a while, sweat started pouring down his face. Hannah kindly handed him a towel and told him to relax. Moments later, everything went dark. When he finally woke up, panic instantly hit him. His hands were tied, his mouth was covered, and he was trapped in a dark room. Sitting calmly across from him was Hannah. Her face looked strangely peaceful, almost comforting. She softly told him not to struggle because it would only make things harder. Then she slowly picked up a knife. At first, the thug thought she was joking, but the expression in her eyes said otherwise. Without warning, Hannah made her move. The room quickly fell silent. For Hannah, the operating room had once been the only place where she felt alive. Now, strangely enough, taking lives gave her a similar feeling. Soon after, Min arrived to help clean the scene. The two worked together smoothly, almost like they had done this many times before. Personal belongings disappeared, evidence was destroyed, and by sunrise, there was no sign the man had ever existed. Ironically, the neighborhood became safer after his disappearance. To Hannah, that felt justified. Peace had returned, at least for a while, because not long after, someone unexpected appeared and shattered her quiet life once again. It was Professor June Park. But the man standing in front of her looked nothing like the powerful surgeon she once feared. He looked weaker, older, almost broken. Instead of insults, he brought her favorite cake. And for the first time in years, he came asking for help. The truth shocked Hannah. Professor Park had developed a dangerous brain tumor, hidden in a nearly impossible location. Most surgeons would never even attempt the procedure. But there was one person he trusted enough to do it. Her. The professor admitted something unexpected. Despite everything that happened, he had secretly monitored Hannah's work over the years. He knew her surgical ability had only improved. In his eyes, she was still the most talented student he had ever trained. Hearing those words only made Hannah angrier. After everything he took from her, he suddenly needed saving? The same man who destroyed her career now stood there asking for her hands to save his life. Worse still, instead of apologizing, the professor began speaking like a teacher giving orders. He even threatened to expose her illegal surgeries if she refused. For Hannah, it felt like reopening a wound she never healed from. Furious, she told him to leave and never come back. As he turned toward the door, something unexpected happened. The professor suddenly collapsed from pain. Desperate, he searched for medication that slipped from his hands. But Hannah only stood there watching. Years ago, she had begged this man for mercy while kneeling in the rain. Now the roles had reversed. Coldly, she kicked the medicine bottle away. For the first time in years, Hannah enjoyed seeing him powerless. All the anger she buried deep inside finally exploded. She laughed, mocked him, and released years of hatred all at once. Thankfully, Min stepped in and called an ambulance before things became irreversible. But Hannah had no idea. Her decision that day was about to create a much bigger problem. Soon after, authorities suddenly shut down her clinic. Enraged, Hannah made a phone call and quickly learned who was responsible. Professor Park. He gave her a simple message. If you want your clinic back, come find me. At that moment, Hannah realized the nightmare she thought had ended years ago had just begun again. Hannah traveled to a luxury medical awards event where Professor Park was being honored once again. For nearly a decade, he had dominated the medical field, earning praise as one of the country's finest surgeons. To everyone there, he looked untouchable. But seeing him celebrated only deepened Hannah's resentment. While walking through the venue, she accidentally overheard several doctors discussing something interesting. The event sponsor, a powerful businesswoman named Madame Ray, was desperately searching for someone to save her young son. The boy had a dangerous brain tumor. Because of its complexity, most doctors refused to operate. And according to everyone there, only Professor Park had the skill to save him. The moment Hannah heard this, an idea formed in her mind, a chance for revenge. She approached Madame Ray directly and confidently introduced herself. Without wasting time, Hannah showed medical footage from a similar surgery she had secretly performed years earlier, a case many hospitals considered impossible. The patient survived and recovered fully. Hannah promised she could save the boy. Impressed by her confidence and skill, Madame Ray asked what she wanted in return. Money? Status? A favor? Hannah only asked for one thing. Don't let Professor Park receive this year's highest award. She wanted him humiliated, publicly, but instead of agreeing, Madame Ray immediately threw her out. To her, anyone who openly hated their mentor couldn't be trusted. Hannah assumed her plan had failed, but later that same night, everything changed. Unexpectedly, Madame Ray contacted her again. Her attitude was completely different. She agreed to let Hannah perform the operation. But there was a warning. If anything happens to my son, you'll pay for it. Soon after, Hannah boarded a private jet and flew overseas for the surgery. The operating room was already prepared. Despite the pressure, Hannah remained confident. First, everything went smoothly. Then suddenly, blood splashed across her face. Doctors around her began to panic, urging her to stop and stabilize the patient. But Hannah ignored the noise. Her eyes never left the operation. Time slowed. Every second mattered. Outside the room, Madame Ray waited in terror, afraid her son might never wake up again. Meanwhile, back at the awards ceremony, something shocking happened. Professor Park unexpectedly lost. Another doctor received the highest honor instead. The room fell silent in disbelief. Yet strangely, Professor Park calmly applauded, almost as if he expected it. Days later, Hannah returned with satisfaction written all over her face. The surgery had succeeded. She couldn't wait to see the professor's reaction after his public humiliation. But instead of anger, he stayed calm. Too calm. And that bothered her. Because what Hannah didn't know was this. The reason Madame Ray changed her mind had nothing to do with revenge. Before the surgery, she secretly met Professor Park and asked one question. Can I trust her? Even knowing it would ruin his chance at the award, Professor Park told her the truth. Out of every student he ever trained, Hannah was the only one talented enough to save the boy. He called her a once-in-a-generation genius. Those words erased Madame Ray's doubts. For the first time in years, the professor had protected Hannah from the shadows. But peace didn't last. Soon after, trouble came crashing down again. Hannah's illegal surgeries were exposed. Someone close to her had betrayed her. A middleman who arranged underground patients had secretly been selling information to police to protect himself. And one leaked video changed everything. Authorities now had footage of Hannah secretly operating on a dangerous gang leader. Worse, they brought the evidence directly to Professor Park. The moment he saw the footage, he instantly recognized her. But instead of exposing Hannah, he stayed silent. Still, police soon discovered one of the illegal surgery locations. And during the investigation, something disturbing was uncovered. A buried body, wrapped in plastic. The missing nurse. Standing nearby, Hannah acted perfectly calm, even casually petting a police dog as if she had nothing to fear. The officers found her behavior strangely unsettling. But Professor Park understood immediately. He knew exactly what kind of monster his former student had become. And deep down, he realized he might not be any better. Professor Park quickly pulled Hannah aside. His expression changed instantly. Instead of acting like a respected doctor, he angrily warned her to stop acting recklessly. If police connected her to the murders now, everything would collapse, including the surgery he still desperately needed. But Hannah misunderstood his concern. She believed he was only angry because she ruined his award ceremony. The old resentment between them returned immediately. Their conversation ended coldly, and the tension between them didn't go unnoticed. A detective nearby quietly remembered Hannah's face. Former student. Suspicious behavior. Possible connection. At first, it seemed meaningless. But the investigation soon took an unexpected turn. During forensic testing, investigators found unusual animal fur stuck to the nurse's clothing. The victim didn't own pets, which meant the evidence likely belonged to the killer. Unfortunately, a young officer carelessly discussed this discovery around Professor Park. And that turned out to be a terrible mistake. That night, the professor invited the officer to meet privately. The young man thought he was simply helping the investigation. Instead, he walked straight into a trap. The next morning, he vanished. No calls, no trace, nothing. And that's when the truth about Professor Park slowly began to surface. The kind, respected surgeon everyone admired had a terrifying side hidden beneath his calm personality. This wasn't the first time he had crossed dangerous lines. Years ago, during surgery, he had secretly tried to eliminate a colleague he deeply hated. But someone noticed. Hannah. She realized exactly what he was attempting and quietly prevented disaster before anyone found out. Instead of exposing him, she protected his reputation. Ironically, that moment only pushed them further apart. The professor hated the fact that his brightest student had witnessed his darkest side. Soon after, that same colleague mysteriously died under suspicious circumstances. No evidence. No witnesses. Only silence. Now, years later, history was repeating itself. As Detective Kong investigated the missing officer, he discovered something strange. The officer's final contact had been Professor Park. When questioned, the professor calmly explained that they planned to meet, but something urgent came up. His story sounded believable, almost too believable, because behind the scenes he had carefully prepared an alibi. A housekeeper believed he stayed home all night. Security footage seemed normal. Every detail was perfectly arranged. Professor Park had planned everything. But there was still one dangerous loose end. The middleman who handled Hannah's underground surgeries. A greedy opportunist who sold secrets to both criminals and police whenever it benefited him. The professor decided he had to act first. So he contacted the man personally. Instead of threatening him, he offered something tempting. Money. A major client. A secret surgery worth a fortune. The bait worked immediately. The middleman took it. Meanwhile, police pressure around Hannah intensified. To make matters worse, tragedy struck again. One night, Hannah's dog shelter suddenly caught fire. All 3 of her dogs, gone. To outsiders, they were just pets. But to Hannah, they were family. The only emotional comfort she had left. She was devastated, consumed by grief, and furious. Certain someone was responsible. She immediately confronted Professor Park. The meeting exploded into chaos. Blinded by rage, Hannah rammed her truck directly into his car. Once, twice, still not enough. Professor Park stepped out calmly, lit a cigarette, and simply stood there, almost daring her to continue. Min sat nearby, terrified. But Hannah couldn't think clearly anymore. Hatred had completely taken over. Yet in the end, she couldn't do it. She couldn't kill him. Not after everything. Broken and emotionally drained, Hannah drove away feeling like her entire world had collapsed. At the worst possible moment, the middleman appeared again. This time, with pressure she couldn't escape. Years ago, Hannah borrowed a huge loan to attend medical school. And now the debt had become massive. The middleman demanded she complete one final surgery to pay it off. She wanted nothing to do with him anymore. But she had no choice. What Hannah didn't know yet was who she'd be forced to work beside. Professor Park. After years of hatred and separation, teacher and student were finally about to stand in the operating room together again. Hannah was forced into a situation she could no longer escape. The middleman's pressure had reached its peak. Debts, threats, and police attention closing in from all sides. The only way out was a dangerous underground operation. But there was one shocking condition. She wouldn't be working alone. Her partner for the surgery was none other than Professor Park. After years of betrayal, hatred, and emotional collapse, fate had brought them back together inside the same operating room. On a private yacht drifting far from land, a powerful cult leader lay unconscious. His identity was hidden, his existence illegal, and the entire procedure was being done in total secrecy. No hospitals, no oversight, only survival. As the surgery began, tension filled the room instantly. Hannah and the professor stood on opposite sides of the table, neither trusting the other, both carrying years of unresolved pain. But the moment the scalpel touched the patient, everything else disappeared. Instinct took over. For the first time in years, they moved in sync again, like the teacher and student they once were. Outside the operating room, Hannah quietly let go of the ashes of her lost dogs, watching them scatter into the sea. A final goodbye. A final piece of her humanity drifting away. Inside, Professor Park suddenly spoke during surgery, something he never used to do. Calm, focused, almost softer. Hannah was confused. This wasn't the same cold man she remembered. But the truth was far deeper. The professor had never truly stopped watching over her. Every illegal operation she survived, every time she escaped punishment, every obstacle that mysteriously disappeared from her path, it was him, silently protecting her from the shadows. Even the scholarship she lost years ago wasn't betrayal. It was protection, to stop her from falling into the hands of people who would have destroyed her talent. Hannah stood frozen. Everything she believed for years started to collapse. But there was no time to process it. The surgery wasn't over. The patient's condition suddenly worsened. The room panicked. For a moment, it felt like everything would fail. But Hannah and the professor locked in again. No words, only understanding. Step by step, they pulled the patient back from death. And against all odds, the surgery succeeded. Later, as they left the yacht, silence filled the space between them. Years of hatred, misunderstanding, and pain hung in the air. Hannah finally confronted him, asking why he never explained anything. Professor Park simply replied that some truths are too heavy to say, and some students must walk their own path to become who they're meant to be. For the first time, Hannah didn't respond with anger, just silence and reflection. But their story wasn't over, because in the shadows, the middleman was still watching, and the police were closing in. Hannah's life was still hanging by a thread, and the next decision she made would determine whether she became a legendary surgeon or a hunted criminal forever. And that's where everything gets even more intense. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think and keeps stories like this coming your way. See you in the next one.